From Acapulco, Mexico, this is Anarchast.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I'm of course right here in Acapulco, Mexico. I've got a great first-time guest coming on. It's Dan Johnson of We Do Better. He also did something a few years ago. It was something like People Against the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. Of course, it was National Offense Authorization Act. But he did a lot of good work to kind of wake people up to it and try to kind of stop it in various ways. So we're going to get into that. He's a real activist, and now he's doing something called We Do Better, which I found really interesting because he's kind of gone from trying to stop the government from doing things to kind of creating new solutions to make the government obsolete, which is a big part of what I've been talking about for the last few years. So he fits in perfectly with the stuff that I've been talking about. So very glad to have him coming in from Atlanta, Georgia. So Dan, it's a pleasure to have you on. First question I have to ask you though is, how did you become an anarchist?
Well, it goes back. I started out as a neocon, so basically don't take my guns and assault the earth in the Middle East. And I got introduced to, I heard Senator Rand Paul on the floor of the Senate talking about the dangers of the National Defense Authorization Act and indefinite detention, what you just talked about. And that kind of started my slow roll into libertarianism. I once told a guy, I think at the first event I was at, there was some guy named Michael Hayes who was advocating for the anti-federalists. And I told him that he was an anarchist and crazy because the anti-federalists are trying to destroy America. So, they put the Bill of Rights together, but nonetheless, that progression continued. And really it came down to consistency. It came down to, do we value a world where people act morally consistently, or do we want a world where rulers are able to just go around the rules that they set? And, the big question became, I think the big question that flipped me over was, look, the United States was supposed to be the most limited government in the world, and yet it is the biggest empire in the world. At what point do you go, hey, maybe this government thing isn't working out so well for us right now?
Yeah, I came to that sort of conclusion quite a while ago, that this just isn't working out, probably 20 or 30 years ago. I didn't know what the answers were, and I actually, sort of like you, I kind of got involved in the political system too. I have to ashamedly say, I think I signed up for the Conservative Party in Canada when I was 14 years old. I was like, well, these liberals are obviously crazy, and that's just obvious. Conservative ones, they seem better, so I guess that's what I am, since there's only two options. Within a few months, though, of seeing how the political system worked, I went, this is not good, so I just kind of quit that. I went on to move to Vancouver, Canada, and I had one last sort of, okay, I'm going to try to fix all these problems through the political system, and I ran for city council. I almost won, even though I didn't do anything at all. I didn't even put up one poster or anything. That's how easy it is to get into city council sometimes. Like I came within a few votes of winning. Thank God I didn't, or who knows what path I'd be on right now. I'd still be a city councilor in Vancouver or something like that. And then I was like, okay, I don't know what this thing is. I don't know what the answers are to how we fix these problems, but I just went on to have my own life. I started a number of businesses. As I was doing those businesses, all my biggest problems were always government and government regulation and the taxation, and those were always the biggest issues. And I was like, this government thing, it seems to be more like the problem than the solution. And then later on, I met Doug Casey around 2002. He told me I was an anarchist. I looked into it, and pretty quickly after that, I was like, that's the answer. Why doesn't anyone know this? And then around 2011, I started up Anarchast. I'm like, we have to tell people about this, and I've been doing it ever since. So really interesting story that you have. Why don't you tell us a little bit, first of all, about what you did with the NDAA, because that kind of sounds interesting, that you had quite a bit of success, because that's actually quite rare to have a person like yourself, not a big person, not somebody that anyone knows or anything back then, actually having some pretty good success at trying to stall it.
So a little bit of my background, when I saw that video, when Senator Rand Paul was saying, they can arrest you if you have 7 days of food in your house, if you have weatherproofed ammunition, if you have all of these other things, you can be considered a suspected terrorist if you smell funny. Like, when I was starting to look into that, it was like, I was brought up in a conservative household, and at least one of the things we were taught was that America was the land of the free, or supposed to be, that there were certain values that we were supposed to have in this country. And it just violated all of them. I mean, it just threw out the Bill of Rights. I mean, it was like, it was actually a reauthorization of the Japanese American detention in 1942. Which not a lot of Americans like to talk about, but we locked up 120,000 people because we don't really know, but it might harm you somehow. So I really got into that, and I didn't know what to do. I found people on Twitter who were talking about the NDAA, and I went to my local city council meeting with a resolution that basically said, we won't allow indefinite detention in our community. We still uphold the right to a trial. Didn't have any weight to it. I just wanted my politicians to at least pretend they cared. And one of my mayor, actually, of my city, Dick Edwards, that name means something. You'll see in a minute. He sent me an email, and he was like, these students should have taken Government 160. They don't know the inner workings of our national government, and it's up to us to educate them. Which, go back home, little boy. You're too young to play in politics. And so it was that, the people who tell you, no, you can't do it, the people who kind of spur you on to making it happen. So we went all around the country. We started, we had about 75 chapters at one point, about 30,000 people working with us. And what we did was we would pass a law at the local level, which basically said, if you come in and do this, it will be treated like any other crime. If you detain someone, it'll be kidnapping. If you execute someone, it'll be murder. If you hurt someone, it'll be assault, etc. And then pushing the police department kind of publicly to back that legislation. And we got it introduced in about 23 or so states. What we were actually happy with only passed in about 7 jurisdictions, including the capital of New York. But doing that, then I went to Ferguson when all the protests and the riots were going on. And I realized something very quickly. I was escorted off of an American parking lot by the National Guard. At that point, my live stream had died. My camera was out of batteries. And I was just thinking, in the next 2 minutes, if they wanted to, they could take me to Gitmo. And it didn't matter if there was a law in this city that said that they shouldn't. Right now, they could take me away, and there's nothing I could do about it. And I realized, you know what? Although law may serve to educate people, in most cases, it just serves to let the politicians off the hook for abuses that do happen. And so that's when I kind of staggered back. I refocused. I started Solutions Institute, which is an activist training center, saying, you know what, let's just try every approach in the book. We had some success at the local level. Let's teach other people. And through trying every political approach in the book, I started teaching people about how to play on this rigged game that is the political system. And you talked about how easy it is to become a city council person, right? So, we were able to take 10, 100, 150 people and control every single decision that a town made, just with a couple people who were involved. And it's like, so if government's supposed to be representative of the people, yet I can go in, teach people how to be a special interest, and within like a couple of weeks, take control of the government, maybe it's not the best system in the world. And at the end of the day, no matter what we did, we were always playing defense. Tyranny was coming, we'd repeal a law, we'd stop a property owned, restriction on property rights, whatever. At the end of the day, I wanted to play offense, and that is what really, and have a permanent impact. And that is what really led me to We Do Better.
That's great. And so, tell us about We Do Better. From what I've looked into it, it looks like a really interesting concept. So tell us all about it.
Sure. We Do Better is very simple. There is, remember when in Hurricane Harvey hit Texas, just slammed into the coast. It dropped 2 trillion gallons of water on the Texas coast. There was an organization called the Cajun Navy that, just a bunch of random Louisianans who had boats and walkie-talkies and a way to talk to each other, and GPS, way to find people. And they showed up within a couple of days, within a couple of hours of the hurricane. The National Guard in Texas wasn't really activated till 2 days later. They rescued over 6,000 people from the flooding. And the U.S. Coast Guard rescued 4,500. I'm glad they rescued the 4,500, but the U.S. Coast Guard has hundreds of millions of dollars in their budget, if not billions of dollars in their budget. And these Cajun Navy guys are asking for money for gas. And they rescued more people than the entire full weight of the United States federal government. See, that belies a real simple truth in America in particular, and somewhere around the world as well. It is, while there are many ways of providing what we call public services or addressing human needs, whether it's disaster relief, whether it's shelter, whether it's emergency food, whatever, the vast majority of those services are actually already being provided by nonprofits, informal groups, for-profit businesses, citizens getting together like the Cajun Navy. There are dozens of these organizations that serve almost every single community in the United States, and the only issue is people don't know they exist, and people are not able to direct the money that's supposed to go to public services, i.e. their tax dollars, to them. And so what we saw is, what if people could direct their dollars and find these organizations, obviously, but also direct their dollars to these organizations. So all of a sudden, the government has to start competing with people for the money it receives. And we found a little place in the United States called Arizona. There is a credit that's existed for the past 20 years in Arizona that has allowed taxpayers to do just this. So now we have, here's the concept. Here it's already working for 20 years. All we have to do is take this really good idea and start spreading it around the country, and that's what we're doing.
That's great. So when did you start it, and sort of what stage are you at in doing these things right now?
We Do Better officially launched October 10th of last year. And on February, I want to say 20th, the state of California introduced a bill that would allow Californians to direct up to 500 of their tax dollars to any nonprofit organization in California that served human need. That's coming for a hearing in a couple weeks. We have active teams in about 12 states. We've 3 prongs of action. Number one is most people who need food tonight, let's say, or need shelter tonight. If you ask them, do you know of an organization in your community that provides this? They'll say no, and they'll end up going to the government. What we're doing is we're building a search engine called Social Safety Net that will allow anyone to type in their zip code and their location and find a list of organizations in that area that are their zip code and their need, and find a list of organizations in that area that will fill that need. Number 2, we're looking to pass this legislation, which we call the Universal Charitable Credit. The only piece of politics that We Do Better actually does is saying, look, let's pretend politics is a boxing ring, and you're required to punch your ticket to go into politics. Whether you want to be involved or not, or have any impact on the outcome, you are required to pay for that ticket. What we're saying is, what if you were able to take that money and go, I'm not paying into this boxing ring. Instead, I'm sending it to organizations that do the exact same thing and do it significantly better than the government. And I'm actually helping people with my money. That's number 2. And then number 3, we were directly involved in doing the largest, one of the largest disaster relief operations in history. We and our 4-organization coalition delivered 4 million pounds of aid to the Caribbean, Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, even when FEMA was telling us that we shouldn't.
Wow. How did you manage to do that?
So we partnered actually with the Puerto Rican National Guard. There were so many people. I mean, one of the things that's missed in disaster relief, in this kind of direct assistance, is how many people actually donate their private jets. How many people with lots of money donate their jets, their cruise ships, their all of these tools to get aid to people. And one of the people who donated a private jet was Jay-Z. And so we filled Jay-Z's jet with probably 30,000 pound supplies. And we flew it to Aguadilla Airport, which initially the government had said didn't exist. And they were only allowed to use San Juan. But we flew it into Aguadilla Airport, a former NASA base. And we landed the plane, and FEMA comes up. And FEMA tries to confiscate our supplies. And says, we're running this island, because they didn't want to, they remembered Katrina. They didn't want to get embarrassed. And when a government bureaucrat doesn't want to get embarrassed, they don't increase their efficiency or do a better job. They control everything. They keep everybody else from doing anything. And so FEMA comes up and they're like, we want to confiscate your supplies. And of course, we didn't want to give them the supplies. So there's this kind of standoff as we're not opening the plane door, and they're not allowing us to bring the supplies. And we ended up having to bring in the Puerto Rican National Guard, who have families who were directly affected by the hurricane, who have, care about people on the island who could use these supplies. And they had to more or less at gunpoint hold FEMA off while we put transfer supplies to the island. So we worked with the organizations, and including some government entities, that were actually willing to put people first instead of bureaucracy first. And that's how we were able to get those supplies over to the Caribbean.
Wow, that's amazing. And such a typical story that I almost always hear, especially when it comes to FEMA, is that they are usually in the way of aid getting through. I know a person, Danny Sessoms, who does the crypto show in Austin, Texas, and he was going around, he raised money using Dash cryptocurrency to get supplies for people during that the hurricane in Houston. And everywhere they went, they were trying to hand out stuff, and the cops were stopping them. They were trying to take their stuff away. The FEMA, the same thing. They wouldn't let them go into the FEMA camps where they heard they didn't have anything inside. Like, they heard there was no toothbrushes, there was no certain things. And Danny's like, we've got them all here. And they're like, no, you're not allowed in. This is just such a typical story. And it's sad that more people don't realize that that's what's going on. And I wonder if through things like what you're doing, we can wake more people up to what the real problem is and what the real solutions are.
Well, you know probably very well as someone who runs Anarchast, that anarchism has a, shall we call it an image problem? That when people think, and this is why I don't usually openly refer to myself as an anarchist. I use voluntarist or I use other things, not because I'm not, but because it sends the wrong message. It sends the wrong kind of connotations to people. I've never thrown a Molotov cocktail in my life. I didn't jump on top of police cars, right? But that we were able, because we engaged with directly providing aid and addressing people's basic needs when government was not, or when government stood in the way. We were on it. We were mentioned on MSNBC. We were mentioned on Ellen. We were mentioned on some of the biggest on Fox Business. We were mentioned on some of the biggest mainstream platforms in existence. And this, I think, is a key thing for anarchists and for people who like liberty to understand, is that you will bring more people over. Not by, oh, well, you have to have a philosophical religious transformation to anarchy, but by simply pointing out, hey, look, there's the Cajun Navy. They do so much better than FEMA. Shouldn't we be able to support them? Shouldn't we have them in the areas of society they do better? When you put government up to competition, there's a reason government hates it. It's because it usually loses. When you put government up to competition, what you're doing is you're saying, I'm not going to tell you how much government you should or shouldn't have. I'm going to say, look at all of these options that are available. It's not just government, and the government's not even first. There are all of these. I mean, a good example, actually, if I can throw it out, is, at least in the United States, welfare basic cash assistance is done through the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, TANF. For every $10 that someone puts into TANF, how much can it cost to pay a guy to write checks in an air-conditioned building? It's cash to cash, right? How much could we possibly be paying out for this? Only $2.34 out of every $10 to the TANF system actually goes to help people in need. On the other hand, you have an organization in Michigan called Crossroads of Michigan, and we have plenty of these organizations listed on our Those Who Do Better page at wedobetter.org. But you have Crossroads of Michigan. They also provide basic cash assistance. But for every $10 you give them for basic cash assistance, 90%, $9 of that actually goes in the hands of the welfare recipient. This is a way to not only have the government compete, but to actually introduce a policy or to introduce people to concepts of liberty without having to say liberty, without having to say anarchism, without having to say join the Libertarian Party, without having to say, get involved in politics. No, just simply who does a better job. And the vast majority of the time, it's the people that do the better job.
Yeah, absolutely. I even have my own personal stories. There was a tropical storm here in Acapulco about 5 years ago, and it wiped out an entire town down by a river. Just the river overflowed and wiped out the entire town. And my wife's from here, and she said we have to go down there and help. And I put out a thing. I did one of those crowdfund things. Raised $5,000 to $10,000 via Bitcoin and just cash donations, and we brought in tons of supplies, and we were the only people there. And my wife's brother was he's not a full doctor, but down here it doesn't really matter if you're a doctor, you can still be a doctor. He knew what to do when people had cuts and how to sew them back up and stuff like that. So we were the only people there, and we're delivering them food, medication, anything they needed, water, everything. And I asked one of the people when I was there, and I was like, where's the government? They're like, I don't know, we haven't seen them. Like, it just was not even there. So if we weren't there, no one would be there. And it's just so typical of the case. And so in your opinion, because you've been doing this for a bit now, what is the real issue that needs to be dealt with the most to get people to realize these solutions? Now, I understand by doing what you're doing, you're already starting to fix that, but what more can be done? Do we need more media for this? For example, I didn't hear about that story about Puerto Rico. I think I did hear you were there. I saw something on Facebook, but I didn't hear that story. If someone like Luke Radowski of We Are Change was there actually filming this, going, look, the U.S. government is stopping us from delivering aid, he would get that out to like hundreds of thousands of people. So maybe there's a media angle to it. In your opinion, what things do you need to get this out there more so that we can help more people?
Sure. So there are a couple of things that are the reason, essentially, why the United States, people keep looking to government to anytime there's a human need, right? And I just put a post out this on my Facebook page about how, there's a lot of libertarians out there who say taxation is theft. And regardless of whether one agrees with that concept or not, it is the number one most hated political phrase, at least according to FEE, in both libertarians, liberals, and conservatives. And one of the reasons why that is because people look at that and go, oh, all you're saying is you want to keep all the money to yourself and let the poor people starve in the streets. That there are no other solutions, that if there were, weren't this taxation, that no one would get taken care of, et cetera. And it may even be true in some cases that communities are not used to that type of self-governance or freedom, that they would actually take care of each other immediately. But there are two big things that need to happen if we're going to not only help people, but also advance liberty. Number one is right now, when there is a human need, when there's a social problem, people look to government as the number one or only place to solve that problem. And they look to the people, the private sector, or nonprofits as maybe second. We need to flip that. And that is going to require a lot of media. That is going to require shows like Anarchast. That is going to require other podcasts. That is going to require people to go, you know what, when, here's a controversial one, gun control. When all of the stuff comes out about the Parkland shooting, the narrative I didn't see, and we need to see more from Liberty people, is the systematic failures that resulted in kids dying in a high school were caused because government is coercive. And because government is coercive, it wastes and it misses things, and people aren't held to higher standards, and they don't have to compete. We have those fundamental flaws on our website as well, dobetter.org, but that's number one. And number two, where are all of our other solutions? We have Detroit Threat Management Center. I'm sure you've talked about them and talked to them before.
Yeah, they've been on our show. Great stuff.
Dale Brown is great up there. You have Guardian Angels in New York. All of these options that do exist. Private schools. Do people get shot in private? Our kids get shot in private schools? Not very often. That anytime there's an issue where people are calling for more government, the number one response should not be, here's why government is bad. The number one response should be, here's why X organization, X people, X company do this job and solve this need better. That's number one. Number two, if you theoretically are in a peaceful war or in a war with someone, if you're in a war with someone, the side with the most resources often wins. No, not always. Sometimes there's guerrillas and sometimes you can do other things, but they can just win a war of attrition. Right now, the government, just the federal government, has about $3.6 trillion a year, not including what they just borrow and pretend that they have or what they print out of thin air. So if you're a government doctor and you provide a service at $1,000 a person, but you have $3 billion in the bank, you're going to serve more people than a health clinic like Clinica Mi Pueblo in Southern California that only has $100,000 in the bank. So number two is we need to be able to direct our resources away from the government and to these organizations. That's why we're advancing the universal charitable credit, which has already been endorsed and advocated by libertarians running for office, by organizations on the left and on the right. In Arizona last year, taxpayers who are only able to direct about 400 of their taxes per tax year, taxpayers directed $52 million away from the Arizona state government and to these organizations. Well, guess what? When these organizations have the resources to take care of human needs, and they're already doing better, eventually the point comes where the politician doesn't have the argument for taxes anymore. The politician doesn't have the women, the children, the roads, the defense. When all of that is already being taken care of better by the people, the politicians just look like the greedy authoritarians that most of them are. And the justification for raising taxes, or one might argue having many of them at all, goes away.
Yeah, absolutely. With your point on media, that's why I brought it up earlier. I think it's really important. And I've said this so many times on the show. For anyone out there, if you've got a video camera, even a cell phone, these cell phones are so good nowadays. If there's an issue in your local area, and I think Dan really brought up a great point. Don't go after these sort of public sort of safety sort of issues with the approach that the government sucks. Find the private solutions that are working and really get them out there and really promote them. And of course, at Anarchast, Luke Radowski has his Change Media University where he teaches you how to become an independent journalist. Dan Dix at Press for Truth as well. Josh Sigerson of World Alternative Media. All these people are at Anarchast all the time. But you can just learn to do this stuff on your own. Just get out there and put it out there and get it to people like Dan and myself. There's ways to contact us through various ways, Facebook or whatever. And if we see these stories where you're really showing that private services have really done a better job than government services, we'll use our networks to get those out there even more. So that's a really good point. So everyone out there, if there's so many places that everyone is watching from. Everyone lives in a different place, and there's usually some sort of issue in that area. Get out there and cover it. That's really important, and it will help to really wake people up. And I wouldn't doubt it if Dan, maybe you might have even almost like a media arm of We Do Better, where you would help put out these sort of videos as well. If you don't, maybe that's a good idea. And then secondly, you mentioned about fundraising. Are you talking more about people just donating to these things, or are you talking about this alternative approach that you've been trying to try to get these governments to have to give up a little bit of all the stolen funds and give a little bit of it back? What's your exact approach on that?
Well, while both approaches are good, I mean, going to your neighbors and saying, hey, I'm going to voluntarily provide this service to somebody if you voluntarily give me money to do it, that approach is very good. The problem is that a lot of Americans, I can speak to Americans because I live here, but I'm sure this is the case around the world, that they already have so much of that money that is really supposed to be going to the public, to public services, to helping those in need, i.e. taxes. That's so much of that is already taken out of their paychecks, is already taken away from them, that in many cases, they don't really have the luxury of, I'm going to give you $1,000 to go take care of people, because the government's already taken most of that. You see, taxes goes all the way back to ancient Sumerians, where they were under attack. And they're like, well, because taxes being kind of an odd concept, that it's the only transaction that's viewed as legitimate where I can force you to give me money, right? If I do that in the other case, as everybody knows, it's considered robbery or theft or whatever. That taxes actually go back to ancient Sumeria. And the Sumerians, their argument was, we're under attack. We are all going to die if we're not allowed to force people to give a few dollars into the pot. And so, okay, that argument kind of makes sense. We all don't die. We give you a few dollars. You force people who don't. Okay, fine. But over time, taxes began to be looked at as the number one or only way of solving collectively solving social problems, getting together and solving, whether it's drugs, whether it's crime, whether it's infrastructure, getting together and solving those problems. And if that's what it's already supposed to be used for, that money is already supposed to be used for solving our social problems, we should be able to, at the very least, as a mainstream capable step toward anarchy, we should at the very least be able to say, you know what, we are going to take 500, a quarter, 30% of our taxes, and we're going to at least make sure they're doing some of the good they're supposed to do, instead of asking people to, on top of having all your money taken from the government, please now also, fund taking care of people, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. So that brings up sort of a final point here is how can people watching this show right now, how can they get involved? How can they help? What do you need? Let us know.
Sure. So there are three big ways to help. Number one, the website I talked about that connects people with the organizations in their area who can help. We've just created the wireframes and we've gotten all the databases and stuff like that from the IRS. Don't ask me how that happened. But we got all that from the IRS and we're ready to put it together. We need to raise about $50,000 in order to put this website together and have it running. It's going to be backed by crypto. All the details you can find on their website, wedobetter.org, etc. But we need just $50,000 to put this website together so anyone in America can have a ready-made tool in their hands to find the organizations. If you'd like to help with that, you can go to wedobetter.org and donate to support development. Number two, we have teams in about 12 states right now. But if you think, you know what, I'd like to empower the people in my community to direct their dollars to the organizations that are actually serving people instead of to the bureaucratic nightmares, if you go to wedobetter.org, click on Get Involved, let us know that's what you'd want to do. We'll provide you with all of the resources to bring your community back to We the People. And then finally, if you'd like to help out with disaster relief, we are currently building solar-powered wells and solar microgrids in Puerto Rico. So when the next hurricane hits, and we're going to have another bad hurricane season coming up, when the next hurricane hits, they don't lose all of their power and all of their water. They're on an island. Having fresh water should not be a problem. So we're building those. You can support them and you can volunteer. Again, all of that is at wedobetter.org. And lastly, if there's one thing that I want people to walk away from this interview with, is if you walk away from this interview with, we can do better, that we the people can do a better job than the government, you're wrong. We are. We already are. This is not something in the future. This is not some theory. This is not a concept that will come about one day. These are example after example of organizations that, because they're not burdened by the flaws of government, they're able to serve the people, and they've been doing so in many cases for decades. Those are the organizations we should be talking about that, look, a free society is already here. We simply have to show people where it is and be able to fund it. And you can do all of that at wedobetter.org.
That's great. And it brings another point up that I always say is just get out there and do stuff in your local communities. There's so many people like us that like to sit in their basements and read Rothbard and, oh, we're totally right on all the philosophy. We know this, but you actually have to get out there. And it's amazing once you get out in your local communities. And don't get out there with, you're such I hate you so much because the government, all these sort of stuff. Don't do that kind of stuff. Do what Dan's doing. Try to find ways that you can help, whatever the issues may be. Maybe there's a homeless issue in your local area. Obviously, this is a hilarious one to me, Dan, is, U.S., the land of the free, the wealthiest country in the world. They collect over $3 trillion, as you mentioned, in extortion taxation funds. And there's more homeless people in the U.S. than I think I've seen anywhere else, with maybe the exception of India. And of course, it's all due to the government. A big part of it is the zoning. So people can't even just put up a little shack anywhere. Here in Mexico, there's no homeless people. You just go and get some tinder blocks and you got a house and you're fine. But you can't do that in the U.S. You go to the U.S. and there's just people sleeping on the streets everywhere. And according to, what they say about the government, well, the government's supposed to take care of those people. No, they don't. The cops go around and they beat them and they treat them like crap. And if you even try to feed them, they'll stop you. Get out there and do good things and sort of help in your local community and make the point that, look, isn't this better than what the government's doing? And slowly and slowly.
And speaking to that direct point and adding a We Do Better twist to that direct point, if you will, In Atlanta, Georgia, where we're based, there are about 3,000 or so homeless people on the street. And the city of Atlanta, it costs them about $17,600 every year in emergency room visits, in misdemeanor charges, in, I'm not sure, lawsuits for beating up the homeless, probably. There's an organization here called Georgia Works. And what Georgia Works does is they go to these homeless guys and they say, look, we know that you want your dignity. We know that you want to be able to work. We will train you up and we will get you back into the workforce. And 90% of their graduates not only have a job, but keep it for over 6 months at over minimum wage. And it only costs $2,700 one time per person. If we had more Georgia Works and less Atlanta Has Homeless, I think we'd be much better off as a society.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, get out there and do stuff. And if you don't want to do that, definitely get over to wedobetter.org and find ways that you can get involved. Just spread it around. Tell friends about it. Spread this video. A lot of people don't know about this stuff. Tell them, anarchy isn't that scary. Just watch this. These people actually have solutions for all these problems. And, slowly by slowly, if we all continue to do these sort of things, we will have results. We're already having results, as Dan already pointed out. And we'll get more and more results to the point where at one point, most people go, why do we even have government? It's just they don't do anything better than any of these other things, and we can actually get there. So really great to have you on, Dan. I should just mention that by the time this video goes live, Anarchapulco 2019 tickets should be available for pre-sale. There'll be a 1-month discounted tickets available. You can go to anarchapulco.com and see the amazing lineup of speakers we've already got lined up. And I'll tell you right now, actually no, go to the site and see. You won't believe who we've got lined up. You'll actually be shocked. Go to anarchapulco.com, and definitely, as I said, go to wedobetter.org. We'll have all the links down below. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, share. That's how we can help change the world for the better, all voluntarily, without hurting anyone, and the world could be a much more beautiful, peaceful, and prosperous place. So that's it for Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.
There was an idea
to bring together a group of remarkable people.
To see if we could become something more.
So when they needed us, we could fight the battles
that they never could.
Time, the state will know what it's like to lose. To feel so desperately that it's right, yet to fail all the same. Dread it. Run from it. Freedom still arrives.
Vacate the state. Engage all the speakers and get this man a microphone.
Fun isn't something that one considers when eradicating tyranny. But this does put a smile on my face.